sometimes you can look into it and it seems okay, it seems doable. As we say, he seems worth it, but it's really not. It's really a very big problem. I can think of a certain situation I was very involved in, where the girl that was going out knew his situation. She thought she knew his situation. She even knew we said, you got to look into it. Is he on medicine? Yes, he's on medicine. What's the medicine? We found out the medicine. Like, everybody was very upfront. I personally contacted, for this girl's family, a very well-known therapist in the city of Chicago, where he said, oh, that's super common. It's no issue. He sort of said to me, like, if people like that, you worried about shidduchim, nobody would get married. You know, no issue. He is a very, very reputable therapist that's very highly regarded and who I know professionally. I can't say personally, but on a professional level, I know him well. I mean, I knew him enough that he knew who I was. But that wasn't true at all. It was, and practically speaking, because they are married, it still is a huge, huge, huge issue. So the best advice, in other words, I'm saying, speak to a doctor, find out the extent of the problem. And now I'm giving you another layer of advice that is equally true, which is to speak with someone, if you can find someone, and do research to try to snoop around and find someone who's married to someone with that type of situation. It might not be exactly, because you might be able to find exactly, but close enough. Because, like I'm saying, unfortunately, it's very, very hard when you're going out and emotionally invested to see anything clearly. Meaning this other side, like I'm thinking of the very specific case I'm thinking of, obviously not the only case I've been involved in, but this one was very strong, especially when the girl came back to me after with the complaint. Why didn't you tell me? And I said, we did. You wouldn't hear a word. It's very interesting. Why didn't you tell me? We did. We told you. You didn't hear a word we said. The other family did it very right. They said everything, but at the end, which is when you would want to say things like this, when the other person's emotionally invested. Well, she was very emotionally invested, and she very much wanted him. From day one, she wanted him. And that's why she couldn't hear anything that anyone was saying. Now, again, sometimes in that situation, I think of other situations where people get married to someone. Let's say I can think of someone I know, another girl who's married to someone with a certain physical illness. That's a pretty significant illness that came out when they were engaged, and she knew about it, and he told her up front right away, and she chose it. I sort of advised her not to, but she didn't listen to me, and she went for it, and she's happily married, and he has a very significant, at times, physical issue that creates enormous problems. I mean, whatever, not going into the details of his situation, definitely has tremendously impacted their life, but she doesn't regret marrying him at all because she knew it, and it's something she can live with. As versus this other situation I'm thinking where this girl also in theory knew it, but didn't really buy into it and had no clue how enormously it would affect her life, and still does till this day. She told me that her mother warned her of every single problem that could happen. She, of course, knew her mother's crazy, didn't listen to a word, and she said every single thing my mother said happened. I would never tell her that. I never would let my mother know that, but every single thing she warned me about happened. And again, this girl also complained to me, why didn't you warn me? I said, I did. I warned you. You didn't listen. I warned you. We all warned you. You didn't listen. So it's really hard when you're emotionally involved. And again, in theory, the only time you're going to find out is when you're emotionally involved. So it's hard. That's why I'm saying it so strongly. Because this girl told me, you didn't say it strong enough. I said, I said it. I said it when you were in high school. I said it when you were going out. She said, you didn't say it strong enough. I didn't hear it. So that's why I want to say very, very, very strongly. Hopefully it shouldn't be anyone's issue here. But maybe it's going to be a friend of yours. So I'm trying to say it very, very, very strongly. It doesn't mean you can never marry someone who has a mental illness. It doesn't mean that. It means you have to really, really understand the ramifications and then decide if he's worth it. And if he's worth it and you really understand what you're getting into and you speak to someone who's married in that situation and understand it, then You can also have a beautiful marriage. It's possible. Like I'm saying, this woman with her husband who has a certain fairly significant physical issue, she's went into it with open eyes. It's caused tremendous difficulty, but she doesn't regret the marriage at all. So it's not saying you can never marry someone with a mental illness. It's saying know what you're going in through with really, really, really open eyes. Any thoughts, any feelings, any questions on any of that? Again, hopefully an irrelevant topic, but if not for you, maybe for someone else, it is significant. And again, everything I said, so I was focusing on a mental illness, but it's the same thing for a physical illness. Absolutely no difference. You speak to the family doctor, you try to speak to someone who's married to someone with that situation, and you try to be dispassionate, although you know you're very emotionally involved. Dina.
So what if they disclose this to you at a later point in your dating when you're already pretty invested and you know this is, going to be a thing, and it's kind of like pretty much all together, and then they kind of like drop this on you? Do you start your research all over again? Like
That is when they drop it on you. And again,
okay.
if it was you and you had a certain physical, mental, emotional condition, I would tell you to do that too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they're not doing anything wrong because that is what you do. Again, obviously sometimes, and it depends, some people, especially with certain mental issues, people really aren't so embarrassed. It's not viewed as such a big deal. It might come up in the conversation, or they might say a story or two, and you start wondering, and then you could ask a question. They're like, oh yeah, I have this little thing, and I take this for it, and it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So it could come out earlier in that fashion, physical or mental. I mean, it could come out earlier. If it doesn't come out earlier, and they're not doing anything wrong, I'm not just talking about people that are doing anything wrong. If they're doing it right, they will tell you the last possible minute. Like when you think you're going to get engaged, they say they want to go out one more time, and then they explain this to you.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and if it was true for anyone on this call, and you had something personal or something in your family, I would tell you do it exactly that way. Don't tell them. And at the very end, like when you're about to get engaged, then you say, I do need to speak one more time. I have something I want to talk to you about. And then you share it. And then they process it. That's how you would do it. So I don't fault anyone on the other side of the mechitza for doing it that way, because that's exactly how I would tell you to do it. I'm saying, and yes, the hook then is you are emotionally invested. I have a woman I know the woman, I know the man from two different ways. And she has diabetes. And she told the man she was going out with at that point, and he said to her, he said, listen, if I'd known before, I would definitely not have gone out with you. But now it's too late. And they got married, and thank God they have a life together. But because of her condition, I think they only were able to have 2 children, which in our circles would be considered very, very, very little and a very big limitation. But that was the reality of her condition. If he had known before, he wouldn't have gone out with her. At that point, he said, it's too late. Like, I can get married to you anyway. So that is how you do it. So I'm not faulting the other side for doing it that way. That's exactly how you do it. I'm saying to everyone on this side, if it ever comes up, which it does sometimes, it's very hard to disengage when you were about to get engaged, when you knew that night you were getting engaged and you were sort of wondering what you wanted to talk about, when everything's talked over and everything's done, and then he suddenly puts this on you and you're like, oh, but we're ready to get engaged. Like, whatever, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And I'm saying, please don't say that. Mm-hmm. Do some research. Don't just perfunctory research. Do the real research. And then if you decide it's fine, that's good. But know what you're getting into with open eyes. So the research you would do wouldn't be researching how good is he and how worth it is he, because obviously you've gone out with him and you really feel he is great. It's specifically research in this issue, speaking to his doctor, speaking to people that are married people in this situation, so you really feel this is something I can handle. And he's worth it. And it's something I can handle. You want to make sure it's something you can handle. And obviously, God runs the world, and people, many people, I mean, most mental illnesses come out in early 20s. So there's plenty of people that get married, not trying to fool anyone, have no clue. And then a year or 2 or 3 later, it comes out. And okay, that's hashgacha pratis. And a physical illness also comes out like that sometimes, many times, many times. There's so many people that the illnesses their spouse is suffering with and that therefore they're dealing with, neither of them knew. Nobody was hiding anything from anybody. Nobody knew about it when they got engaged and when they got married. But if bashgacha pratis, it's already known and they're doing the right thing and telling you, then you have to do the right thing and really research. Put your heart on the side, which is very difficult, and let your head deal with it. That's what I'm saying. And again, it doesn't mean not to get married, and it could be totally worth it, and it could be a wonderful life. It's just something you have to really look into. Any other thoughts or questions or feelings on that? Okay. I think we mentioned this before, but I think it came as sort of on the side, and I wanted to sort of know that I was saying it, is never go out if you have a bad vision of marriage. And unfortunately, there's enough people out there that sort of do have a bad vision of marriage, and then they end up just sabotaging the process. And it's like so not fair to themselves and so not fair to anyone they're going out with. It usually happens if you didn't like your parents' marriage, or sometimes I've even seen it with a sibling. I've been surprised. There's a girl I was talking to. Her parents had a wonderful marriage, the best. She can't stop speaking about how amazing her parents' marriage is. She has many siblings married, and one of them has a bad marriage. And for some reason, she's sabotaging every time she goes out because of it. Why? Does that one marriage outweigh all the others that she knows? I don't know, but it does. So sometimes we don't understand the way we work, but we work that way. So it could be a sibling, it could be parents, it could be another traumatic event in your life, in anything in this field, that sort of consciously you want to get married. You totally think you want to get married, but subconsciously you really are scared and don't want to get married. And then when you go out, you don't allow it to happen. And it keeps happening until you're like, why is this not happening? And then sometimes someone helps you figure that out. And I've seen it enough times that it's not so uncommon. It's not common, but it's not so uncommon. So what do you do at that point? What do you do if somebody's marriage or some personal trauma affected you and you don't have a very good feeling about marriage? I think the best way to handle it is to consciously try to absorb the energy, the dynamics of good marriages. To really search out, if you're living at home, if you're independent, look for people whose marriages you really like what it feels like, and hang out around their house for a while. Make yourself their Shabbos guest, make yourself their bat bias, be around them to really have a sense of what love feels like, what respect feels like, what the bond feels like. Obviously a religious Orthodox couple isn't going to wear romance on their sleeve. That would not be considered appropriate or respectful of that relationship. But if you observe carefully, you notice things. So it's I'm not saying that's the only tip, but maybe anybody else out there has other tips, because I think it's something that there's a few ways of healing. It's the best way I know. Besides, of course, you can also should do your own personal work with yourself, but I'm saying to really just absorb that marriage is good is really helped by being in a place where marriage is good, and ideally in a few places, and seeing again that marriage is good, and seeing again that marriage is good, and seeing again that marriage is good, and really soaking in that message to really try to shift inside of you that sort of subconscious voice, but it's there, that is resistant. Anyone have any other ideas or tips on this subject? Because it definitely comes up. Ideas, tips, questions? Okay. And again, it doesn't remove doing your own personal work also, trying to heal the child within, talk to yourself, trying to, throw out the garbage in your system, try to discard the pain, it's really good to forgive. If it was like in parents or something like that, it's really good to try to just really forgive, because forgiving tremendously releases the negative energy you're holding inside yourself. So that therapy, yeah, good therapy helps. Good therapy definitely is a great way to go. All of these things, and at the same time, to try to absorb, hang around couples that have a marriage that you like the dynamics as much as you're able to sense it. Feels very good, feels very safe, feels very respectful, feels very warm and caring, feels a lot of love, because that's what you want to like shift your inner psyche and know that marriage is really good. It is. It's not just exciting time. It's really good. So let's speak a little bit about changing a person. Now, we of course all want to change so many people in our lives, our husbands, our children, our colleagues, I mean, our boss, our workers. There's lots of people we'd like to just change. Doesn't usually work out. So the basics is that you have to realize that once you're married, you can't ask him to change. You can't. Done. He is what he is. Hopefully you realized when you were going out. Hopefully you decided he was worth it. Nobody's perfect, and you can't start putting on demands to change. So what can you do if you'd like him to change? What you could do, the best strategy I can think of is you give him free gifts. Free gifts means there are no strings attached. It's not a tit for tat situation. It's not like, well, I'm going to give you this gift and this is what I'd like in return. That's not a free gift. That's obnoxious. So you could give him free gifts, and then if he's sort of expressing that he would like to give you a gift, you could say some things you'd like. That's fine. And he could choose to take you up on your idea, or he could choose to not. And that's fine. And if he doesn't, it's fine too. And if you gave him a beautiful gift and he didn't even think to give you a gift back, that's fine too. It's a free gift. A free gift means it's free. A free gift means very hard. That's why I'm saying it very strongly. It's sometimes very hard to say, but I did this and he was supposed to do that and he didn't follow my script. It's like the most frustrating thing is to go into a whole like deep, meaningful conversation with your husband, but he doesn't respond the way he's supposed to. He like doesn't know the script that any of your friends would have known what to say. He doesn't know it. It's a really frustrating experience. Just don't bother. Don't try. It doesn't work. He's a man, different wiring. So your free gifts might or might not elicit his. And that's fine if it doesn't. And it's nice if it does. And if he wants to give you something and you can say what you want and he decides he'd love to give you that gift, that's great. And if he gives you a different gift, accept it graciously. That's great too. Because otherwise it's a strings attached situation. And that's not fair. It has to be a no strings attached. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is when you're going out, that is the time to negotiate. So this is the golden and only opportunity to negotiate is when you are going out. So you're going out for 3 weeks and you're married for forever. But that's how it works. So when you're going out, that's when you can ask him to change. You can ask him to change a habit. You can ask him to change a perspective. You can ask him to change his life plans. Any of those things you could ask. You could ask anything you want. You're going out. This is the time to do it. Don't say the critical mistake people make is, we'll discuss it later. Fatal last lines. No, because later you can't discuss it. What do you mean? It's not fair. I told you I was planning on learning in COLA for 30 years. If you didn't want me that way, you should have told me then. I told you I was going straight into business. If you wanted me to learn, you should have told me then. I told you I only believe in homeschooling children. I said it. I told you I would never homeschool children. I said it. I told you I want as many children we can have. I told you I only want 2 children. Like, I said it. How could you now come to me with any complaints? I said it. And he'd be right. If he said it and your brain, you said, we'll discuss this later, you made a very critical mistake. And there's lots of people that make that mistake and say to themselves, it's okay, he doesn't really mean it, he'll change, we'll discuss it later, any of those lines. No. If there's something you want to discuss, you discuss it now. Because later you can't discuss it. It's not fair. I can't tell you how many people literally get divorced over things that one side said very clearly. Common thing I've seen. I don't say common, I don't say divorce is common, but where they're going to live. He clearly, let's say people from two different countries, he clearly said he was going to live in America. And she's thinking, no, it's fine. He'll move to Israel. He had no intentions. He said it. What did you want from me? I said it. So a lot of times people say things, people have to really understand that this is the time to listen, as we've discussed. This isn't normative listening when you're listening for the other person so you can interject with your opinion. This is a time when you're really listening to the other person. And this is a time when you have to really weigh, am I comfortable with his vision? Am I comfortable with living where he wants to live? Am I comfortable with the type of life he wants to have? Am I comfortable with his views on how to raise children? Am I comfortable with his level of religiosity? Do I want more? Do I want less? Am I good with where he's at? You have to really think, and you can ask for changes. You find out he's a smoker, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't handle smoking. I don't want my lungs destroyed. I don't want my husband's lungs destroyed. Now's the time to ask, not when you're married. Now's the time to discuss it. Now, caveat on this concept. Never make your request an ultimatum. Because you might ask, and you might say no, and you might think it over and decide he's worth it. He's worth it. I wanted to live in New York. He wants to live in Chicago. I never want to leave New York. I want to leave my family. But you know what? He's worth it. Chicago's not so far from New York. I'll do it. I asked him to stay in New York. He said no. And 100 million different things like that. And there's many, and this comes up very, 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 very often. So if you expressed it like, well, I could only marry someone who doesn't smoke, or I could only marry someone who's going to live in New York, or I could only marry someone who would send their children to this type of school, or I could only marry someone who is going to earn enough money that I don't have to work. And then he says, no, I'm sorry. I really, really thought this was going well. And I really thought this was it, but I can't change that piece. I'm sorry. You still want room to be able to say, you know what, you're worth it. So you have to phrase your requests in a way that you don't feel stupid to say, but I already told him I'm only going to marry him if he changes and he's going to change. So I guess I can't now say I'm going to marry him anyway because I'll look so strange. I'll look so stupid, which is a silly reason to give up a wonderful shidduch, but does sometimes happen. So never push it off the discussion. Think over everything he's saying seriously. If you're not comfortable with something, again, you could be not comfortable with something and think it over and decide, okay, I always thought I wanted a husband like this, and he's like that, and he's worth it. You don't even have to raise this issue to him. You yourself decide he's worth it. Or you just say, well, I could ask him. See what happens. Now, let's say we have this happy situation where he says, oh, for you, for sure. Yeah, I could change. I'll change that vision. I'll change what I'm doing. If it's something at all that can be expressed now, you want it to be expressed now. Meaning, in a nice way, you have to say this very nicely, you need to make sure it happens now. Not that the change will be later after you're married. You need to see the follow through. Now, again, obviously in some things it's very simple. If you're talking about the way he dresses or that he's smoking or things along those lines, the change could happen now if he's committed. If you're talking about his vision of education and you wanted to homeschool and he would never, and you discussed it with him and he agreed that he would be open to homeschooling, it's not really so easy to apply it now. But a lot of things can be applied now. And anything that can, you want to make sure he's doing it now. Or like somebody that would say, well, now I watch movies, but when I'm married, I'm not going to watch movies. If you're going to stop, I'd really need you to stop now. Because if he's not going to stop now, there's very little hope that he's going to stop when he's married. So on one hand, you can ask change, and he might say no, and you want to leave your space to come back to him if you decide to, and you might decide not. And there's plenty of girls that really think this is the one, and they have one big issue that they want to change, and he refuses, and the shidduch breaks up because that's a very important issue to the girl, and obviously a very important issue to him because she really wants it, and he's really not willing to change. Dina, question?
Yes. Can you hear me? Is my microphone on?
Absolutely. I hear you perfectly. I hear you.
Do you hear me?
Now I hear you. I heard you and then I didn't hear you. Now I hear you.
Okay, we're back. Okay, thanks. So what if the man says that he will change? Like, let's say it's something like watching movies or like that. How do you know that that's happening?
Well, it would be something like watching movies or smoking or something like that. And he says he will change, and you say in a nice way. It's really hard to once a person's married, so many things are going on, to then begin a whole new discipline. I think it's really something that if you're really serious about it, you'd need to start now. Do you think you could start now? And he says, yeah, I could do it. It's not a big deal. You say, I really appreciate that. That's so amazing. I'm so impressed. And the next time you meet, ask him what's happening.
Uh,
Now, if you're going to say, well, he's not going to be honest to me, well, why are you marrying him?
Right, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of times there's a lot of gray area in there. Like, I'm really trying. It's a struggle, but I'm getting better. Like,
right.
okay.
So then you'd wanna ask questions. Again, I would just give an example. If that's important to you, if you don't want him to watch movies, and that's really important to you, especially for a man, you don't need your husband when you're in your 8th month or 9th month of pregnancy to be watching, 3/4 naked size 0 girls dancing across the screen. Like, you don't really want that. So you would like him to stop before anything. You say, yeah, I know it's hard. I know for my always the best way to talk about something, talk about yourself. You could say, if this is true, there was a time when I watched anything, and then I realized that certain things I stopped, and I stopped this area, this area, this area, and then and I struggled each step of the way. Yeah, it was really hard, but I just kept sticking to it because I had a vision of the type of person I wanted to be, or the type of mother I wanted to be, or the type of children I wanted to raise, whatever you feel is appropriate or is true to you. And that just kept me really strong. So sometimes when it's hard, you need to have your tools. What's going to keep you strong when it's hard? And that'd be a great point of discussion, sharing tools and seeing what he comes up with. In other words, if he's blowing you off and you have a serious discussion, you're going to know he's blowing you off. Unless he's just completely lying through his teeth about the whole situation, which I would be very scared for many other reasons if he is. But if he's not, but he was like, yeah, I'm trying. I don't remember the exact wording, but there was a Rebbitzin, a wife of a shliach, a shlucha, I think she was in Sydney, Mrs. Feldman. And the first time she traveled from Sydney all the way to New York to be by the Rebbe, this was many years ago. And she was like, she had this draining flight, all these kids going, she was like lots of little kids, and she was completely drained. And when she comes in for the private audience for the Yechidus, the Rebbe asked her something, like the Rebbe started saying what work was she doing for the women of Sydney. And she's like, what work am I doing for the women of Sydney? I'm barely surviving. But of course, she's not going to say that. So she said some polite thing like, I try my best. And the Rebbe said, like, in America, and she's from Sydney, the big state, says, in America, when people say they try their best, I don't remember exactly how the Rebbe said it, so I'm paraphrasing, but something like, it means you're not really doing anything. So if he would say, I'm trying my best, I want to know what that means. If this is a serious issue for you. If it's not a serious issue, then you don't care. But if you care, and again, it's not only with absolutely anything that's relevant now. If he's looking for a job, if you're concerned because he doesn't have any job at all, not learning, he's not working. Sure, thank you for joining. He's not learning, he's not working, he's not doing anything. And yeah, you spoke, that's really important to you. You don't mind if you learn, don't mind if you work, but you want to be doing something. Yeah, I'm going to find a job. Well, how's it going? I'm trying. You'd want to know what that means. You'd want to know that there's a real effort, that's not just like I'm trying, which means I'm doing nothing. So I think in any of these types of situations, it's once you already had a long enough discussion to get him to commit to changing, you definitely want to follow through and make sure that the change actually happens. Very, very important. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this? Okay. Obviously, I'm just saying this because sometimes people blow, it's a very small idea, but make sure before you go out, you check out with Dor Yesharim. Sometimes people, especially when they're at a certain point in their life, you're like, I don't have to bother, it's not relevant. I mean, you know, this person says, I'm totally past being able to have children, but otherwise, it's always something to check, not like, oh yeah, oh, we're about to get engaged. Whoops, let me ask Dor Yesharim. Something to do before. You know, in general, obviously, when you're older, it's you were trying and you're older, and that's what God wanted, and that's your situation. But in theory, of course, the younger the better. Now, what does that help you doing if you're not younger? is to understand why and to see how that affects you now. Meaning, what's the idea besides saying, oh, the younger the better in terms of going out? Because when a person is younger, they're less self-sufficient, they're less self-centered, they're more willing to compromise, they're less selfish, they're still unformed, they're more needy of another person to be with for whatever reason. So it's like a nice ripe time for people to grow together. And some people think, well, if you wait and then you're more mature, but it doesn't usually work that way. The type of maturity you need for marriage, you really need to gain in marriage. It's hard to gain it not in marriage. So if you're not, 19 or 20 or 21, it's good to think about these points and to try to figure out, apply them to yourselves and think, well, if this is the general approach, and the general approach is for these reasons, how does this impact me now? Meaning, if the approach is, well, when you're younger, you're less self-sufficient, so you're more ready to compromise. You're less self-centered, so you're more willing to compromise. You're unformed, so it's easier for you to compromise. You're like, at this point in your life, you are self-sufficient, you are formed, and you have been taking care of yourself for a while, so you have a lot of focus on self. So I think it's really good to think, well, what's the best way for me to open myself up and put myself in a situation that I am still able to compromise, which is a tremendous key to a good marriage. How can I be in a situation that I still am able to compromise if I'm not 19 anymore? And that's I think that's a really, really, really big piece, because we're going into marriage. If you don't have the advantage of being so young that it's just natural, you have to work hard to put yourself in a certain frame of mind that you can open yourself up to change and grow, even if you're already formed and older and have accomplished things. Any thoughts on this? Because I think this is a really important piece. Like, how would you, if you're older, how would a person, I don't know if you're so old, but not yet so young, how do you reawaken that inside yourself?
Are we talking about reawakening? What are we reawakening exactly?
To reawaken that state of getting married in a way that you're so open to just growing with the other person, which means by definition, when you're living with another person, there's a lot of shifting and changing your space and doing things a different way and taking up less space to give him room for a lot of space in your life and in the daily behaviors of your life together. And I'm saying when a person's like 19 or 20, they're not fixed. Their boxes haven't grown yet. So they just sort of naturally segue into that space. I mean, obviously some people don't, but normatively people do. But once you've already lived and experienced, and especially when you're self-reliant, if you're young, for a boy or for a girl, you're not really self-reliant yet. So therefore, you feel more needy for the other person. And therefore, you're more willing to change and meld and work together to form this. But when you're older and you are self-reliant, you are self-sufficient, you've lived out your own for a number of years, you take care of yourself, it's hard to shift and say that I really am very needy for this relationship. And therefore, I really am going to want to really bend to make it work. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if I'm expressing myself clearly, but I'm trying to convey what I think is a very important point. But I don't know other words for it.
What's like an example of, I mean, I know you gave a few.
I mean, a very simple example is like, I just mean this in the most simple sense. If you've lived alone, you've had your own apartment for the past 10 years or whatever, and you have your own say there. You have your order of when you have supper and cleaning up and laundry, and suddenly there's somebody else involved, and your Seder doesn't work anymore because he's not ready to eat at that time. He wants to eat at a later time, or he wants to eat at an earlier time when you're not ready and you're not used to it, or he leaves a mess around, or you're doing his laundry, or, the classical argument they say about squeezing the toothpaste, that's the example somehow everyone always brings. It's just, he does it differently than you, and it's uncomfortable to you, and this is how you've always kept your apartment so neat and so clean and so organized, and he's not. So if you're young, you don't have all this rigidity of expectations. And if the older you are and the more you've lived on your own and the more self-sufficient you are, especially financially self-sufficient, the harder it is. It just is. That's just a fact. So I'm not saying a very novel thought. I'm just putting it on the table as something that's really important to recognize. Really important to say, do I have rigidity in these areas? Do I have a set of expectations? I want him to enhance my life. No, you're growing together. He's not around to enhance your life. It's a couple. It's a marriage. So you have to get out of my life that he's adding to and make it our life. And that's a very, very big paradigm shift, which is just very natural if you're young, because you haven't really developed your life yet. So you don't have to shift anything. But we've already really developed your sense of self. And I'm saying, especially if there's financial, independence, because then it's like, in a very subconscious level, it's like, I don't really need him. So what am I doing this for? No, you do need him. You desperately need him. You desperately need him. Well, you know that because you want to be married, but there's still a piece of you that thinks you don't.
Is there a way to, I guess, minimize? I think that like something that I see, and maybe it's just me projecting, I don't know, but I sometimes see that men can be intimidated if, even they might not know how well you do financially or how not well or whatever, but they're intimidated if you have a career or something that's, you might not need them in that way. Is there any way to kind of like minimize that effect on you?
Minimize their being intimidated?
Minimize, coming off as,
I'm so self-sufficient.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, like you are, and if they ask you, oh, do you live with yeah, I live with a roommate or this, that, whatever, and oh, I have a job, and the more you can talk about what you do with your time, it sounds like you're self-sufficient because you are, is there a way to kind of like play that off in a way that's not so, because I know especially like even before you meet someone, someone will look at a resume or hear about you and think, oh, you know, she has this type of job. Well, people who are attracted to that might not be, like, for example, well, okay, like just to give you, you know, specifics, like my job and everything, it doesn't mean a lot to me. Like I, you know, if I were married, I would quit yesterday. Like I don't have any like connection, even, you know, working hard for it and everything. It really doesn't matter to me. It was just what I did with my time. And I like it, I enjoy it, but not enough to care that much. So that being said, though, if you see it on a resume or someone knows what I do or something like that, they might see, oh, she has this degree or job or whatever, and it'll attract a certain kind of person. Or, you know, it might intimidate people who, you know, don't know that for me, it's just a day job. It's not a, you know, career or anything
So
fancy.
I would think, first of all, don't put it on your resume.
Right.
um, or if you do feel that it looks weird for it not to be on your resume, then you would write it as such. You know, my day job is whatever, my passion is for dot 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 dot. So you're clearly stating this is just how I pay my rent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be something that you would say up front, you know, and sort of early on. If you're thinking for either end, if he's looking at you like, oh, you're this career woman and that's what I want, you're like, no, I'm not. Or, oh, you're a career woman and I'm intimidated. No, I'm not. So I would think in either way, you would state it straight up, like right away. It could be the first time you go out. You know, just sort of bring it up as like, oh, I know people think, oh my gosh, you work so hard. This must mean so much to you. And honestly, it really doesn't. It's something I do with my time. It's the way I pay my rent. And, you know, it doesn't define me at all. It's not at all how I define myself. And this is how I define myself. So I would state it that clearly for either end of the spectrum, because you would just want to state that right away. And I'm saying even in your resume, you would write it and say either you don't write it at all, or if you think it would look weird not to, you would write it in such a way that clearly states, this isn't me. This is just what I do for a living. It's
Is
just what
it
I do.
inappropriate to completely leave it off? Sorry, just.
I don't think it's inappropriate to leave it off. But again, it is a very logical question a person would have. And that's why I'm thinking, since it's such a logical question, well, what do you do for a living? If you said nothing, that would also sound weird.
Right,
So,
I kind of like, I usually give the vague answer, I work in special ed, so that covers a whole lot of ground.
yeah,
And
yeah,
by the
that's fine.
time, okay, like that's
That's
not
fine. You
deceiving
can say I work
anyone
in
or
special ed.
anything.
No, that sounds like a beautiful feminine job.
Okay.
Um, and you could write it that way in a resume also, and it's true. Or I'm saying you could write what you do and say, but this isn't how I define myself, you know. And it's so interesting. I think one of my sisters, when I guess she was marrying off, maybe I guess it was the first child she was marrying off. So she asked to see my son's resumes to get a feel of how to write a resume, which is very funny because I remember with my first student some 30 years ago, and the concept of writing a resume came up, and people thought it was so weird. It was just never done before, and now it's so normal. It's just what's done. So everything changes. So resumes have only been around for less than 30 years in the religious world. So I sent her two of my sons, two that had already been going out at that point, their resumes, and she read them, and she's like, wow, this is the first time I ever read a resume that I really had a feeling for who your son is. You really conveyed who he is when I read the resume. And I read that was my goal. I'm not trying to fool anyone. I'm not interested for someone to go out with my son if she wouldn't be interested in him. It's not a hook to get you into a situation you wouldn't want to be in. So I really feel in a resume you express yourself, and I think it would be wonderful in a resume to really state, this is how I define myself. This is the important parts of my life to me. So, up front, that's not, and that I think that's good that should be very clear. And I think saying special ed's great and works and removes both ends. But my end, where I was coming from was the person really looking at themselves. I don't have an answer for you. It's a personal thought of how do I open myself up if I am financially self-sufficient, if I have been living alone, if I do know how to take care of myself, to really put all that on the side and look at marriage as, I'm building my bias family. We're builders and we're building this together. And I really need him to be a good builder. And I really need to be his good partner. He's going to be my good partner. I need to be his good partner. This is a partnership. This is forever. This is the most important thing I'm doing in my life right now. You know, this is it. This is ultimately what I want to be doing. And if I really am going to invest everything I can to make it work. To like psych yourself up. So if you're used to doing things a certain way and he's going to do something very different way, it's not going to faze you because it's worth it. It's worth it for what we are building together. Now it's a little late. I'll just say one little last small idea. Just a small point. I'll stop at that point. But sometimes when you're going out, a person does something or says something that has a lot of implications for you. Like, ooh, it set off a lot of bells in your head. And sometimes it's just in your head. It's not necessarily true that someone who goes to that shul behaves in this fashion, or someone who likes that drink behaves in a certain fashion, or someone who has this bad habit behaves in a certain fashion. So, but sometimes it's just like, it's almost subconscious. You can't figure out why, but something just really got you really upset. And then if you think back, maybe you can figure it out. It's really important in those situations not to negate the person. Now, again, obviously, if he said something that really is, you know, he's telling you how he comfortably lies and cheats and steals for his business, and of course it's fine because it's, you know, just in the name of business. And you're like, I wouldn't want to live like that. So you see it straight up. He's being straight up about it. That's great. And you don't want it. But I mean more something that's more like, not nice people dress like that. Not nice people use that word. He used a word that you associate with not nice people. Not good people do that. And maybe not. So it's, instead of negating him, probe that issue to see, is he really a great person with this particular habit? Or is this habit truly indicative that he's not a very good person? And sometimes it's like this, and sometimes it's like this. It could be like an indication that he's not a good person, but an equal 50% of the time, it could just be something in your head. Because you happen to know 3 people that all go to that shul and are all very, you know, not the type of man you'd want to marry. It doesn't mean that everyone that goes to the shul is like that. But it might mean everyone that goes to shul is like that. So you sort of have to do research and figure it out. Okay. Well, we'll stop here at this point. Only a tiny drop of overtime. And thank you so much for joining. Hope it was helpful. Hope there was things that were practical and useful. And you should have a wonderful, luminous Hanukkah starting tomorrow night.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs.
Special
Stern.
time, literally a time of miracles for them, for us. So we should all tap into the miracles of Hanukkah. We should literally see those miracles over the next 8 days in our lives.
Amen.
Looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful week.